Hey, John Gilroy here. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity and the ball of complexity. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator today. In the virtual studio is world-famous Chuck Herrin. He is the field CISO for F5 Networks. Chuck, how are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Good. We had a chat a couple days ago, and we went back and forth, and we were quoting people about cloud security and cybersecurity, and went back and forth. So I gotta use some of these quotes we used in this warm-up. So, Chuck, I'm going to start this interview with a quote from a world-famous technology leader, and you tell me who said it. Are you ready for the first one?
Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. Today's networking is a ball of complexity and too difficult to manage. Now, who said that?
I don't know. It sounds like something I might have said.
Yeah, Chuck Herrin. Winner, chicken dinner. Yeah, we're talking about, in the olden days, you take the A+ test and you hook up a network and you go home. It was great. There's no problem at all. But today there's hybrid networks, and it's not just commercial organizations that are suffering through this. It's federal agencies as well. So hybrid networks bring hybrid problems. Is that right, Chuck?
Totally. Long-standing saying in security. I think Bruce Schneier said it first, and I've taken it from him. And that was 25 years ago. Complexity is the enemy of security, and the environment has never been as complex as it is right now.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's so complex now. And now, to that end, I will admit, F Networks, I went to your website today, and you folks have a new white paper out, and it's called 2024 Digital Enterprise Maturity Index. And if our listeners are interested in learning more, F5.com is pretty easy to find. Just download it and read it and keep up. It has a lot of very interesting observations from the commercial and the practical world. And I think we set the problem here, So 15 years ago, pound on the table, go to the cloud. Fine. Here we have multiple clouds, hybrid clouds. We have different systems and everything else. So where does F5 fit in this picture? Throw me a lifeline, buddy.
Yeah, that's exactly the intent. That's the goal, is to try to throw organizations a lifeline and add simplicity and visibility to a very complex operating environment. I think current stat right now is 38% of our customers operate in 6 or more environments. And it seems that multi-cloud is just inevitable. Hybrid cloud is inevitable. That's a big thrust of the maturity report, the DEMI, is understanding beyond just technology, what kind of processes, what kind of training, what kind of skill sets do organizations need if they're going to be pushing into the AI era, because these AI apps are just the most modern of modern apps, and they typically run with different components of the application in different areas, different clouds, on premises, et cetera. So we're gauging and helping to illustrate the types of behaviors and the types of processes and architectures that people need, that governments or companies need, if you're going to be successful in implementing these type of technologies, right? It's not just, you can't just buy a tool and it magically works. There's an ecosystem that you have to sort of contemplate here.
And the ecosystem is very difficult to define, I remember getting in high school with debating people. Define that term. What is peace? What is, and define the terms. And I think what a lot of technology companies will say, well, hey, Chuck, okay, Chuck, what you want to do first is just, define your network. Tell me exactly what you have on the network. And then Chuck gets out his clock. Okay, 10:08. With all these new inputs, it's just hard just to start that and find out what's there. So that's the first challenge, isn't it?
Totally. And from a security perspective, from a defender perspective, one of the challenges that defenders continue to have is that over the last couple of decades, most of the advances in software development are about incenting velocity and speed of delivering business value, and security has been an afterthought. And it's never moved quite so fast as it does now. And defenders are often finding themselves behind and finding it difficult to catch up with that pace of change.
Well, here's a quote from your report. Generative AI's revolutionary impact, and here's from you guys say, is that generative AI is fundamentally changing digital operations, significantly impacting automation. And so you have to keep up with that. And F5 has been around for a long time. It's been a leading edge in many areas, but this is brand new, this trying to control AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's F5 actually started as a company that was ready, set up to optimize video game traffic. And it turns out that if you're good at application shaping and good at routing and high performance application management, you can do a lot of things with that, which is what F5 has been doing for the last decade or so, is really going into a full platform security play. And there's a lot that you can do with full proxy. And so what we're illustrating now is if you're going to be running these artificial intelligence and ML models, especially the LLMs, the generative AI, not the machine learning that we've been using for the last 20 or 30 years in different contexts, there's a specific architecture that comes with that. Depending on, are you going to be using chatbots? Are you going to be using retrieval augmented generation? Are you really on the bleeding edge right now in mid 2024 with agentic AI? Because those different architectures require different things, and you need to have different controls in place because your attack surface is fundamentally driven by your architecture and what you expose to the outside world. And the old vulnerabilities that we're used to dealing with, if you think of like cross-site scripting and SQL injection and these things, these are still valid attacks. You still have to worry about those. But when you expose new attack surface like APIs or these large language models, you expose new aspects of your attack surface as well. And defenders need to have that as close to the beginning, as close to the design phase as they can. And we're seeing that's it's inconsistent across the markets of how companies and government agencies are actually approaching these problems.
I'm glad you used the word architect. I want you to put on your time traveler hat and go back 15 years. 15 years ago, I was sitting in a radio studio, and an enterprise architect for a large agency walked in, and he had a 11x7 laminated both sides with all these geometric images on there, and this pointing to that, and that pointing to this, pointing to this, and he was very proud of it. It was like a pyramid or something. It was like it was sketched in stone and granite somewhere in Egypt. I mean, he handed it with his two hands, and this is our enterprise architecture. And now, when I talked to you on Friday, prepping for this interview, you said, "Oh yeah, well, architect design is the attack surface." So this guy be rolling over his grave from 15 years ago, huh? Handing me the attack surface right there, huh?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's that basic architecture is a great input for a practice that we encourage and we use a lot, which is threat modeling. Just understanding in a given architecture who are your assets, actors, interfaces, and actions, or who's doing what to what via what. So I mean, security really does need to follow the architecture so that you're allocating resources the right way. But I think it's going to be tough to have a laminated copy or bound books or anything today,
right?
Given the pace of change, right? It's more like a whiteboard with dry erase markers.
Yeah. And someone behind you always erasing what you just wrote.
Right on, exactly.
So my listeners are federal listeners. Many of them are contractors and end users. So where does F5 fit in this whole security aspect of protecting your attack surface? Your architect design.
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of folks know F5 as a load balancing company, and should. And F5, invented load balancing essentially, and we're still really good at that. We still sell over $1 billion a year in load balancers and hardware. But over the last several years, as our customers' attack surface has been changing, F5's portfolio has been changing as well. So F5 also owns NGINX, which is the most popular web server in the world. Roughly 34% of the world's websites run behind NGINX. F5 purchased a company called Volterra and bought a large fiber network and SaaS offering from there. And so what we've been building towards is beyond the attack surface that F5 for, which is on-premise, on-premises based, hardware based, application shaping and security. Now also into the modern apps and into the cloud, so that we can meet our customers sort of where they are instead of only offering partial solutions. And in fact, it's the partial solutions that don't work across all these environments where customers wind up needing to run their workload that lead to this ball of fire that we talk about, this complexity, and the things like when you go to Google, you have to have a GCP team and an Azure team and an AWS team, and the tools don't work the same way. Bringing complexity to that whole architecture and environment is really what we're trying to do. Add simplicity. It's kind of like with a race car. Add speed and lightness. It's easier said than done. But with network security nowadays, we need to add visibility and simplicity where we can. That's what we're working on.
Yeah. Same principle in rocket design, making it lighter and more powerful.
Exactly.
So because this is Federal Tech Podcast, I'm going to have to quote some federal stuff here. I think everyone knows that the White House has an executive office, and they sent out a little note about artificial intelligence. And I think it's pertinent to this discussion here. And I'm going to quote here. They said that advanced AI governance innovation while managing risks from the use of AI, most especially in those affecting the rights and safety of the public. So what the executive office say, yes, Chuck, yes, we need AI. Yes, we need to lock down our network. Yeah, but, the old four-letter word here, risk. And I think this is where a lot of the application for Gen AI takes place, is that, yes, it can do these things. Yes, it can do magic. And it is revolutionary. but you're not dealing with Joe's Donuts. You're dealing with Sally's health information or Sally's tax returns. So a little bit moving up to a professional level here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about the data. It's all about the data residency, where the data lives, where do you put the data? How do the models use the data? How do you secure the data against poisoning attacks and things like that? The use cases for this type of AI, they're really, really great at doing things that they're designed to do, but they're also fairly brittle. They don't handle unexpected inputs very well. And so they're fairly easy to trick in terms of data exfiltration types of attacks, as well as injection and prompt injection types of attacks. And then there's also unique attack characteristics and vulnerabilities specific to machine learning, like the property of transference. Essentially, if I can use your model and I have ready access to your model, I can clone and steal your model. And then I can generate my own offline attacks against that model. And chances are the attacks that work against my surrogate will now work against your original model. Normal, legacy applications don't have these exact types of vulnerabilities. And given the race condition that we find ourselves in, with the US versus China or with Meta versus Google, if we don't do it, they will. And that's sort of the big theme of AI in general. Everybody is rushing towards the implementation. And it's very difficult to prioritize security and risk when velocity continues to be the prime driver. And so what we're trying to do is build the tools and the training and the design patterns and so forth for our customers. So I know this is a federal space, but in banking, there's an old expression about be the second mouse. The early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese.
Yeah.
Right? The first mouse got his head cut off. The second mouse gets the cheese. The third mouse slowly starves to death. Yeah. So we're trying to help our customers, hit the right adoption and risk balance, so that they don't wind up being, the first mouse on the bleeding edge. Well, that blood has to come from somewhere, and we don't want it to be our customers.
I like the word brittle being used with generative AI because generative AI is put on a platform everywhere, and it's the end of civilization. It's the bestest, and I think the word brittle works. And I was talking to a gentleman last week, and he said, well, yeah, AI can design attacks, but they're clumsy. It's kind of, this word's coming up here. The dazzle is starting to fade, and now the reality is, well, yeah, Phoenix is nice in January, but in August, man, you don't want to go there. Yeah. And so this generative AI is revolutionary, but you have to mitigate risks. And you really have to be careful about not everything is the sample you see at a trade show. It's the reality, and that can be kind of awkward. I like the word brittle and clumsy. We should come up with our new meaning of what generative AI means, huh?
Yeah, totally. Well, and you remember, it wasn't that long ago where we all had the first GPSs in our cars, and we all read the stories and knew people that the GPS would say, turn right, and somebody would turn right into a cornfield. Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm worried about is that people tend to overtrust the technology, even when. So there was a recent experiment where somebody put a malfunctioning robot in a room and had the robot give humans instructions that were odd or weird, and noted how frequently, about 80% of the time, the humans did these weird things just because the bot told them to do it. I think that's a material risk as we go to adopt these models. Is they're great at what they do, but we shouldn't overtrust them yet. They're not foolproof, not at all. They're exactly brittle, as you said, brittle and clumsy.
Yeah, brittle and clumsy. If you are listening to this, not walking your dog, I mean, this is one of the easiest URLs ever in the history. F5.com. Boy, I can't even misspell that or mispronounce it. And you can get the Digital Enterprise Maturity Index and learn all kinds of fun facts to impress your neighbors. Here's a fun fact here. Hybrid applications adoption. 82% of doers operate hybrid applications. Here, back to the ball of confusion here. This is the ball of complexity. It's like, what are you walking into? Yeah, it's easy, but that's so complex and hard to manage. And I guess if you were to stop me on the street and said F5, I'd say app management. Yep. I wouldn't say load balancing. I'd say app management. That would be my go-to phrase. So maybe the current generation is going to be Gen AI management or something, huh? It's a tough. I mean, I'm sure you walked into people in airports and they say, "Oh yeah, app management." That's what I think of you guys.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. And these are just the most modern of modern apps. There's still application architecture. You still have to have the technology changes, but the fundamentals and the principles still apply. You still need to have your basic security covered. You need to do good authorization, good authentication, rate limiting, and so forth and so on. And one thing that I really like about this report and what we put out is it reinforces that it's not just a technology problem, right? There's a people and a process aspect of this. And so essentially, before you go all in on running these next, most modern hybrid apps, let's take a step back and ask yourself, are you ready to run modern hybrid apps? It's kind of like if you outsource IT, but you're not a very good vendor manager. You may not get very good results because you're just, you're not good at vendor management. So before you go all in, let's break down what do companies need to successfully run these hybrid apps, and that's exactly what the Enterprise Maturity Index report was about.
I'm terrible at debate, but I love listening to debates. So I'm going to toss a little debate question out at you here. If you look at this report, the Enterprise Maturity Index, it says that advanced organizations manage an average of 468 APIs. You can manage API. No, 10 years, never thought of managing an API. It was something that's sitting, no, it's being under attack. There is a friend of mine named Patrick Sullivan. He's a neighbor, and he said, the API is a network. So there, Chuck versus Patrick. Toss to you, Chuck. Is the API the network? What do you think?
It's a good question. I don't know if I would say it's the network, but it's definitely modern application infrastructure. It's definitely, it's how the data goes in, how the data goes out. It's how, software developers do the integrations across services or full applications, third parties. And there are entire now modalities. If you think of like the Jamstack, JavaScript, APIs, markup language, that's the app. APIs are absolutely the workhorse, and they're an often overlooked part of the attack surface that is very important to understand how it works and understand the attack surface you're exposing. A lot of defenders have missed that. They've let the APIs spiral out of control, to your point, in the hundreds or even thousands, and now they're trying to catch up and keep up with even attacks that we knew about 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. Now, because you've changed the interface, the I and API's interface, now you've exposed business logic to these attacks that you used to have to, be logged in on a green screen somewhere on a mainframe. Right. We've changed the attack surface and exposed these interfaces in ways that companies don't necessarily understand. And that's a big challenge, especially given the rapidity of the adoption. And now AI is a world of APIs, right? That's how these models work. And now with agentic AI, these models are going to have the ability to dynamically create their own communication channels with other models. And so if you don't have automated processes running to detect new API traffic, new APIs, new interfaces, you're really going to wind up getting behind the eight ball very quickly on how these models are actually working and sending your data back and forth, whether to internal services, east-west, or north and south to the outside world.
I was at a small satellite conference last week in Utah, and it gave away T-shirts, so I got a little bag and the swag bag and the T-shirt, and the T-shirt had one word on it: automation. That's the word. You just used automation. Went, whoa, he must have been at that show. But because I've seen things, good things and bad things, I'm kind of I'm holding automation in my hand very gently and saying, yeah, okay, well, let's take a look here, because automation can lead you in some bad roads, and automation. And this is one of the points you talk about, API, and then talk about automation and operational efficiency. So this is part of your report here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think that it's really critical that we automate as much as we can, and we understand how it works. But then now what's changing is the things that we're automating, like once we start using AI models to not only generate information for something else to act on or potentially consume, but now agents that are going to be doing things, invoking function on your behalf, you need to really understand how that automation is going to work. It's really easy to automate a very defined, step 1, step 2, step 3, stepwise process. Now, the variables are when these models are actually generating things and taking action. If you don't know what they're going to generate and you don't know what action they're going to take, it changes your risk profile quite a bit. So it's important for defenders and developers to really understand what is the potential of this automation. You can't automate a broken process. And if you're unsure about the outcome, you need to be really thoughtful about what you automate, because it may not go the way you want. And this is something I'm worried about with companies that have big plans to lay off huge chunks of their staff because AI is going to fix everything. These models, when they fail unpredictably, and you may not know it for some period of time. And if the people aren't there to recover your business anymore, that may be a recipe for a bad week. So. Yeah. Just be thoughtful in what you automate. You can't automate a broken process. It'll just fail faster and more consistently. So Automation's important, but you got to do it right.
I mentioned I was in Salt Lake City last week. They have big banks there, like in all big cities. And if Chuck walks into a bank, he's probably going to talk about automation and talking about F5. When you walk into, let's say, the Department of Interior, they're going to greet you with security, and they're going to greet you with compliance, and they're going to greet you with a stack of NIST regulations, and then handcuff you, and then expect you to climb a rope. I think a lot of people who are involved in commercial world, they walk in the federal government, well, geez, you guys are swimming the race, but you're dragging a log or something. Now you compare this with, I think there's a lot of interest from my Govy listeners in using AI to make their lives better. I mean, they're sincere about it. I've talked to them face to face, and they're very sincere about that. But then, the sincerity has a clash with some of these regulations, and so F5's got experience in the federal government. But this can be very kind of disconcerting, can it? When they want to do this so bad, and they can see the value, but boy, they're getting held back by so many. Like the first thing I thought about, they said this half of this whole sentence I wrote was about risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's an important point that I have to remind offenders once in a while about is that, especially like in the financial sector, for example, but it applies to government as well. Compliance isn't necessarily meant to protect you. It's meant to protect everybody else from you.
Yeah.
So to some degree, setting minimums for specific, industries and verticals and markets and things is very important because you do want to have that minimum set of standards. But that minimum set of standards tends to be to protect the ecosystem, not the individual agency or the company or the application that's doing something. And so the higher the compliance burden and the more you can automate that compliance burden, the more resources you actually have to do innovation. But, in banking, I came from banking and insurance. And, we say there, the regulators aren't always right, but they are undefeated. This is not something you can't just blow over it, right, and ignore it. There are good reasons you have to do these things, but it does take resources. There's no question. It adds overhead. It takes resources. It limits the available talent. If you have to have people that are cleared and so forth and so on. And in the Fed space, we just have to work around that. It's just the reality of doing business, for a superpower, a nation state. And it's just how we have to do things.
My final question is going to involve a big company called Verizon, and everyone looks for the dibber, and look at what's going on here. And usually it's about ransomware. But API is not in the whole lot. I don't know why. Maybe this is more for consumers or something, but they don't talk about API. I'll have to review it and see. So are they missing the boat? Verizon missing the boat, or are we missing the boat? Why didn't they bring it up?
It's a great question. I think we're missing the boat in that we're talking about, and when I say we, I mean people who are looking for API to be broken out specifically, because one of the biggest attack categories, I think is still the biggest one, is web application attacks. These are API attacks. It's implicit.
There we go. You're defining it differently, right?
Right. So the APIs, to your point earlier about, is it the new network or is it modern infrastructure, whatever? Modern apps are all API first. If you're attacking a web app or a mobile app, there's a pretty good chance you're either exercising the API, definitely, if you're going in through the user interface, or a lot of attacks go directly to the APIs on the back end. 92% of the attacks that we saw in a recent quarter against our distributed cloud were attacks on API endpoints. So
the words I used earlier in the interview was app security, and you're saying, well, John, this is what app security is. This is what the app is now. It's API, huh? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it would be a bit nonsensical if you think about how Verizon were to report that out, if they separated out API attacks into some other category and then said, well, all other application attacks that didn't use an API, we categorize those things differently. It kind of wouldn't make sense to do it that way.
Yeah,
I'd actually say that the API security probably never should have been its own category. We're just talking about modern app security, but defenders and developers got so far apart that a new category came, startups started a new category, and now the industry is consolidating, and it's, we're really just talking about modern application security.
Good. Well, Chuck, I think you've given listeners a good view and good perspective on app security and APIs and where F5 is positioned to help my federal audience. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Chuck Herrin, Field CISO for F5. Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks, John. Have a great day.